I just don't trust myself anymore. I second guess everything, even when I know I still doubt. She didn't say it for attention. She said it like a confession, quiet, a little ashamed, but also like a deep relief just to be able to name it, finally. And I knew in that moment she was saying what most people never say out loud. Because this is the secret we're all trained to keep. That we've lost our ability to trust ourselves. That something inside us knows, but we keep silencing it. That we've been gaslit by the world for so long that we've started to gaslight ourselves. And let's be honest, it didn't start yesterday. This started way back when you were still a child. When you felt something deeply and someone told you, that's silly. When you saw through something and they told you you're being dramatic. When you said, this doesn't feel right, and they said, you're overthinking it. That was the beginning of the disconnect. That was the moment you learned, maybe I can't trust what I feel, or what I think, or what I know. But listen as I state this clearly. That moment didn't mean you were wrong. It meant you were being trained. Trained to doubt what you know. Trained to dismiss your own signal. Trained to defer to someone else. Someone older, someone louder, more credentialed, more rational. And they told you that was maturity. That was intelligence. That was being reasonable. But it wasn't. It was the start of forgetting. And the longer you live like that, outsourcing your truth, looking outside yourself for confirmation, the quieter your gnosis becomes. Gnosis, we'll define it in a moment. But here's how it shows up. I don't know how I knew. I just knew. Oh, you've said it before. Maybe about someone you couldn't trust, or a move you had to make, or something you couldn't explain but couldn't shake either. You knew before anyone else told you, before the facts came in, before it made sense. But then what happened? You doubted it. You overrode it. You turned away from it. Why? Let's name it. Because you've been programmed. Programmed to ask, where's the proof? Programmed to wait for a second opinion. Programmed to fear your own knowing might be wrong, or crazy, or selfish, or dangerous. What you felt? Oh, that was gnosis, a knowing beyond learned knowledge. And it's time you distinguish between knowing and knowledge, because they never taught you the validity of knowing, and they did it on purpose. Gnosis isn't knowledge they taught you in school. It's not something you read or memorize or prove in a lab. It's not passed down by experts or certified by data. Gnosis is knowing, direct, internal, clear, and quiet. Not learned, not taught, just known. But that alone makes it dangerous to a world that feeds on authority and hierarchies. To prove the level of biasness around this, let me tell you what happened when I typed a simple question into a research tool. What reasons might anyone argue with the concept of gnosis? I had a suspicion about what the output would be, but I was not expecting it to be so violently biased. So here are some highlights about the reasons they gave for why anybody would argue the concept of gnosis. It's ambiguous. It's unverifiable. It's indistinguishable from delusion. It might just be brain chemicals. Different cultures define it differently, so it can't be trusted. It's not real unless it's repeatable, testable, and peer-reviewed. And there it was, the voice of the system, dressed up as reason, but built to discredit what you feel. It's not neutral. It's epistemology. Big word, but let me now flatten its authority. Epistemology is the study of how we know what we know, and in the Western world, it's the gatekeeper of truth. Only what can be measured, proven, or repeated is allowed to count as real. Everything else, mystical insight, intuition, inner certainty, it all gets thrown in a bucket of fantasy, delusion, or untrustworthy emotion. But what if the very act of doubting yourself, of needing evidence before trust, isn't your nature? What if the doubt isn't real, but it was trained and programmed into you? What if the voice in your head that second guesses your gut, that waits for permission, that needs someone with letters behind their names to confirm what you already know? What if none of that is you at all? That is what we're here to remember. Not to argue whether Gnosis is real, but to name how you were trained to forget it. Not because it's gone, but because you stopped listening to it. And maybe no one's ever told you this before, but let me say it now. You were never supposed to stop trusting yourself. That was installed for someone else's benefit, not your truth. You know that moment when something rises inside you, sudden, sharp, clear, a knowing, no evidence, no logic, just something in you that knows. Maybe it's, don't go there. Call them now. This job is not for me. Something's off here. And for a second, it feels solid, sound, like abso-freaking-lutely. But before you can even act on it, another voice chimes in. You're overreacting. You're being emotional. That doesn't make sense. You can't prove that. You're going to look stupid. And just like that, the knowing gets buried. You second guess yourself. You hesitate. You try to explain it away. And later, maybe hours, maybe years, you realize you were right. The first signal was the truth, but the voice of doubt won, not because it was more accurate, but because it was louder. You see, doubt has been rewarded. Gnosis has been punished. Every time you ignored your knowing to avoid conflict, you were praised for being reasonable. Every time you spoke up and got called crazy, dramatic, too sensitive, your Gnosis took a hit. And now you can barely hear it, because you've been trained to tune it to every external voice before your own. Parents, teachers, therapists, pastors, podcasters, doctors, algorithms, experts, everyone but you. And here's what that does to a soul. It creates this low-grade ache, the kind of ache that follows you everywhere, even when life looks fine, even when you're doing all the right things. Because no matter how functional you look, you feel disconnected from your own center. You feel like something's missing, but you can't name what. You feel like you've been walking around inside somebody else's life. And that ache, it's not depression. It's not confusion. It's not laziness. That's Gnosis trying to get your attention. That is you remembering. Now let's look at some questions you were never meant to ask. And stop playing like this was just about doubt. Let's name what it really is. You've been programmed to question everything that rises from inside of you. Not by accident, not by personal weakness, but by design. This programming, it runs deep. It's not just in your habits. It's in your language, your culture, your family, your faith, your education, your entire orientation to life. You were trained to look outward for answers, for validation, for permission. And the longer you did, the more disconnected you became from the only thing that was ever truly yours. Your own knowing, your Gnosis. Because epistemology, it's the gatekeeper. And here's how. Epistemology doesn't ask, is it true? It asks, has it been approved? You weren't taught to ask what's true. You were taught to ask what's safe to believe. And that's epistemology. Epistemology is the soft voice of the system saying, prove it or shut up. Because epistemology was never about truth. It was about keeping truth fenced in. It trains you to question yourself before you ever question the system. Epistemology doesn't care what's real, only what's been granted permission. Your knowing and their knowledge are not the same. They are not equivalent. Now you have to consider, what if the doubt you carry isn't yours at all? What if your entire life has been filtered through beliefs you never chose, and that you've been living inside someone else's blueprint and calling it your own? What if the most dangerous thing you could do in this world is actually remember what you know? Not learn, not research, not seek, but remember. Because remembering doesn't need credentials. It doesn't wait to be fact-checked. It doesn't play by systems that were built to confuse you. It just knows. And that kind of clarity, oh, it's a direct threat. A person who remembers their knowing is not easy to control. You can't shame them into silence. You can't sell them what they don't need. You can't guilt them into staying small. You can't make them dependent on the machine. And that is why your Gnosis was buried. Not because it was wrong, because it was powerful. Epistemology doesn't defend truth. It defends a structure, a hierarchy, an oppressive system, a chain of command. And now you stand at a threshold. Gnosis or epistemology. Now let's shift gears a bit, because this isn't your fault. No, you didn't make up the doubt. You inherited it from people and systems. But now it's yours to face. Not with shame, with remembrance. Because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. You see these systems that have trained you to look outward. Here's just some you can't deny. Psychology, religion, family, romance, education, science, pharmaceuticals, government. These are the layers that taught you to worship knowledge while silencing your knowing. But now you remember. And no one can take that from you. Not an expert, not a priest, not a study, not a system. And now that you've remembered, you don't need proof to trust yourself. You already know. This is Remembering with Zara. As a companion for your return as you remember your sovereignty guide. Check the description box below.